By 1861, America was no longer fighting an empire. It was fighting itself. The flag still flew. The language was the same. The prayers sounded familiar. But the country was divided by a line no river could wash away. The war did not begin with gunfire. It began with words spoken too often and listened to too little. With arguments repeated across kitchen tables and courthouse steps until they hardened into belief. Belief, once formed, does not bend easily. It waits, it gathers weight. And then it demands loyalty. Men did not wake one morning ready to fight their neighbors. They woke ready to explain themselves, ready to justify, ready to insist that they were right and that rightness, once threatened, must be defended. It began with conversations that no longer ended in agreement, with pauses that grew longer than sentences, with eyes that turned away before hands were shaken. Listening became harder. Compromise began to feel like surrender. In towns across America, families gathered around the same tables and left with different loyalties. A father spoke of union. A son spoke of sovereignty. A brother repeated what he had heard in town. Another repeated what he had read in the paper. Bread was passed. Silence followed. North or South? Union or Confederacy? These words slipped into daily speech, casual at first, then decisive. They divided neighborhoods that had shared wells and winters. They crept into churches where prayers rose from the same pews but asked for different outcomes. They found their way into letters written carefully, folded neatly, and read with growing unease. No one believed it would come to war, not at first. War was something distant, something history did to other people, in other places. What they felt was disagreement, conviction, a certainty that the future must look a particular way, or it would not be worth having. Children learned to repeat the language of adults. Wives learned which subjects to avoid. Old friends learned how to speak politely while carrying thoughts they no longer shared. And slowly, without a single shot fired, the country changed shape. Lines were drawn that could not be seen on maps but could be felt everywhere else. Lines through families, through friendships, through the idea of what America was meant to become. Not because they hated one another, but because they believed different futures were worth defending. Samuel Carter and his younger brother William grew up on the same land in Virginia. The house sat low against the fields, weathered by seasons that did not ask questions. Their father taught them the same lessons with the same hands: how to mend a fence, how to read the sky before rain, how to stand your ground without raising your voice. In summer, they hunted in the woods behind the creek. In fall, they worked the fields until dusk erased the lines between sweat and soil. In winter, they shared the same roof, the same fire, the same stories told too many times to count. They learned the world together. They learned themselves together. When arguments reached the county, they arrived like rumors at first spoken softly, half believed. Words about rights and duties, about who should decide and for whom. The brothers listened, nodded, disagreed, then laughed it off. They had known each other too long to imagine a line that could not be crossed. But lines have a way of drawing themselves. When war came, it did not ask their permission. It arrived with letters stamped in ink that felt heavier than paper, with meetings that ended without handshakes, with a certainty that demanded choice. Neutrality became a luxury. Silence became a statement. Samuel stayed with the Union. He believed in the country as a single promise, imperfect but indivisible. He spoke of law and continuity, of holding together what time and anger were pulling apart. William joined the Confederacy. He spoke of home and autonomy, of a future decided close to the land that had raised him. He spoke quietly, as if careful words could keep the peace between them. They did not argue on the morning it happened. There was no shouting, no accusations, only a pause that lasted too long. The road waited. The fields were still. There was no farewell speech, only a long silence at the edge of the road. Samuel adjusted the strap on his shoulder. William stared down at the dust, then up at the horizon. They stood close enough to feel the warmth of each other's presence, far enough to know it would not last. Neither brother looked back. The battlefield was not foreign soil. It was land that still remembered their footsteps. Fields once measured by harvest, now measured by distance to cover. Churchyards where bells had called them to prayer now lay silent, stones watching as men passed with rifles instead of hymns. Roads they once walked as boys, barefoot laughing, were cut by wagon ruts and smoke. The ground felt familiar beneath their boots. That was the cruelest part. It was farmland, churchyards, roads they once walked as boys, fences splintered where cattle once leaned. Apple trees stood stripped and broken, branches snapped by artillery and winter alike. The air carried the smell of powder mixed with damp earth, two histories colliding in a single breath. The uniforms were different. The faces were not. Across the haze, men saw shapes that made their throats tighten. A way someone held a rifle. A familiar stance. A voice that carried through smoke and chaos, calling a name that did not belong to the enemy. Recognition struck faster than fear. Men recognized voices across the smoke. Some lowered their rifles. They hesitated, hearts hammering, minds racing through years of shared meals and shared work. In those seconds, memory fought instinct. Brothers remembered brothers. Neighbors remembered neighbors. For a moment, the war seemed to pause, as if waiting for them to decide whether it could continue. Others did not. Orders cut through the air, sharp and final. Flags moved. Lines advanced. The moment passed. Orders were given. Shots were fired. The sound was deafening, not just the crack of rifles, but the shattering of something that could not be repaired. Smoke swallowed faces. The ground took bodies it had once fed. Men fell where they stood, names unfinished on their lips. History would call it a battle. It would mark the date, draw the lines, count the losses. It would speak of positions gained and ground held. It would move on, but the men inside it knew it was something worse. They knew it was a place where the past met the present, and neither survived unchanged. Late one afternoon, after the smoke cleared, Samuel found a wounded soldier lying near a broken fence. The fence leaned at an angle that did not belong to it, posts torn from the ground as if the earth itself had tried to pull away. Beyond it, the field lay flattened and quiet, the kind of quiet that follows violence, not peace, but exhaustion. Samuel moved carefully, stepping around discarded packs and shattered wood, his ears still ringing with echoes that refused to fade. The man's uniform was gray, his face was pale. Blood darkened the fabric near his side, spreading slowly, methodically, as if time itself had decided to be precise. Samuel knelt without thinking. He had done this before too many times, checking breath, pressing cloth, searching for something that could be saved. And then he saw the scar above the left brow. He froze. Samuel knelt and recognized his brother. For a moment, the world narrowed to the space between them. The field, the smoke, the broken fence, everything fell away. What remained was a memory of two boys running the same fence line, daring each other to jump higher, laughing when they failed. William did not speak. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then fixed. He reached out, fingers trembling, brushing Samuel's sleeve as if the touch alone could prove this was not another cruel trick of the war. As if confirming Samuel was real would somehow make the pain less real, Samuel took his brother's hand. It felt colder than it should have. There were no words left that could repair what the war had already taken. Samuel searched for them anyway, an apology, an explanation, a promise, but found nothing that could cross the distance the war had carved between them. He pressed his thumb against William's knuckles, counting breaths as he had done in childhood storms, when thunder made sleep impossible. William's grip weakened. Samuel held his brother's hand until it grew still. He did not look away. He did not move. He stayed because leaving had already happened once, and it had led them here. Around them, the war continued. When the war finally ended, the Union stood. The guns fell silent, not with celebration, but with relief. Flags still moved in the wind, but fewer hands were raised to greet them. The nation survived, yes, but survival came with a weight no parade could lift. Victory did not feel like triumph. It felt like exhaustion. Men returned along the same roads they had once marched out on, older than the years they had been gone. Some walked alone where others should have been beside them. Some carried letters folded so many times the creases had softened into memory. Towns watched them arrive without cheering, unsure which faces to recognize and which names not to say aloud. Cities burned. Streets that once echoed with commerce now whispered with ash. Windows stood empty, blackened frames staring back at passersby like unblinking eyes. The work of rebuilding began immediately, not because hope was strong, but because standing still was unbearable. Graves multiplied. They spread across hillsides and churchyards, rows aligned with care that could not disguise their number. Families learned the language of loss, the pause before a name, the way a chair stayed empty, the way a story ended early. Mothers kept rooms exactly as they were. Fathers learned to sleep without listening for footsteps that would never come. Families returned home incomplete. Tables were set for fewer. Laughter arrived cautiously, as if afraid it might offend the dead. Old arguments seemed smaller now, but not small enough to disappear. The war had ended, yet it lingered in glances, in silences, in the careful choice of words. America was whole again, but scarred. America was born fighting for freedom, but it was shaped by the war it fought within itself. The Civil War did not just decide a nation's future. It revealed its cost.